Good evening in India and good morning to people in the United States and other parts of the world. Good afternoon to some people. I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of you to this global virtual conference on reimagining and transforming the university. We are in the 6th thematic session of this conference. This session is entitled International Mobility and Exchange for Education and Research. My name is Rajkumar. I'm the founding Vice Chancellor of Jindal Global University. I have great pleasure in introducing and welcoming our distinguished set of panelists, starting with Professor Dr. KRISHNA BISTA, Vice President, Educational Services Society of Transnational Academic Researchers, Star Network, Morgan State University, United States of America. Professor Dr. RATNA GHOSH, Distinguished James McGill Professor and William McDonald Professor of Education, McGill University, Canada. My dear friend, Professor Dr. Grant CORNWELL, President, ROLLINS College, United States of America. Professor Dr. ANVER, SALOOJEE, Assistant Vice President, International, RYERSON University, Canada. Of course, I also want to extend a warm welcome to my own colleague, Professor Dr. VESSELIN POPOVSKI, Vice Dean, Jindal Global Law School, Jindal Global University, India, for moderating this session. Over to you, VESSELIN. Thank you.
Thank you, Raj. Good morning, everybody. I see our panelists are in Canada, United States, and thank you for waking up early and being with us today. Let me start by framing the discussion topic today, the internationalization and mobility as part of the collaborations of the universities. And in fact, over the last 20 or 30 years, it has been an immense progress in internationalization. Universities developed a massive numbers of mobility programs, joint degrees, student exchanges, immersion programs, summer schools. Faculty also engaged in faculty exchanges, in joint research, joint conferences, joint publications. And effectively, mobility has become a must to all universities, a sine qua non for progress. As the last panel mentioned, the collaborations and internationalization make universities progress and succeed and achieve the best ranking. But in the meantime, I would imagine the COVID-19 disrupted exactly the mobility. If we used to send students all over the world or accept students from all over the world, the summer schools definitely suffer, the semester exchanges suffer, the faculty who are planning to do research trips or organize conferences couldn't go, or they could only participate as we do now. In a normal year, we will have some of you in India enjoying the hospitality and the dinners and the trips to Taj Mahal. Now we can do it digitally, which the good news here is that we can have a galaxy of stars over those 2 days. Usually we will have only 5 or 6 stars in Jindal over 2 days. So we can do some of the collaborations digitally on Zoom. And the question will become, what would be the future of internationalization? But I will ask this question a bit later. To begin with, I would like somehow to simply have a rehearsal and a quick round of thoughts about how did COVID-19 affected your institution, your international collaborations in your university over the last semester. For that, I will start with Professor RATNA GHOSH. You are the first on my screen, and you are the lady here, so I have a pleasure to give you the floor first. So what was your experience over the last, let's say, 6 months? What is the best and the worst in your institution? Please.
Well, thank you very much. You know, international travel is definitely a defining feature of internationalization. And with that stopped, we have gone online. We went online last semester. I was on sabbatical, but I know that my colleagues were teaching, had to transfer to online teaching. And so, but the recruitment for international students has not stopped. And this coming semester is going to be online, but the students are going to be online from all over the world. McGill attracts a lot of people from all over the world. And we have a lot of students who will be, at least for that first semester, from other countries. But the other aspects of internationalization continue, such as collaborative research. Study abroad programs have come to a halt for the moment. We hope it's just for the moment. But you know, the important thing about internationalization is also internationalizing the curriculum. And globalization in terms of global citizenship values and things like that. And those things will be part of our content in certainly in education where I am. And I hope in other, in faculties also, other courses also, global citizenship. And one other thing that that this COVID has brought into the attention of everyone is the inequalities that exist in society. And I think everybody now is going to focus on that. And that will encourage students to become more more aware of what things are happening, how things happen.
Thank you very much, Professor Ghosh. Indeed, we often discuss this in our university, which is global, Jindal Global University. What makes Jindal Global University? And in addition to global collaborations and exchanges and mobility and faculty and student travel, we always emphasize also the global standards. So it's the internationalization in terms of building up global standards internally. So it's also interesting to elaborate, maybe in another round of question I will ask, what does it mean to be international domestically? But let's move to my next on the screen is Dr. KRISHNA, BISTA, and with the same question, how did COVID-19 affect your institution, your collaborations? What have we learned over the last 6 months?
Thank you for having me. Yes, this is a wonderful experience despite the loss of million lives. Some of the positive changes that the faculty members were provided additional trainings, how to run the online or distance or remote classes. At Morgan here, many classes are offered face-to-face, and in those cases for the faculty member were provided full round of trainings and with the stipend. Actually, I was also the part of that training sessions as a moderators. Also, the university has been successful to run the summer writing institutes, inviting the faculty member from across the university. That was amazing. The students were frequently asked, the opinions of their opinions, whether we should go virtual or in person. So several rounds of assessment were done, and the university has decided to go online, and in some cases it would be virtual, the hybrid as well, depending on the case, the programs. But university has made a significant changes, providing the training and resources for faculty members, those who have never been taught online classes. We use the Canvas management system. Faculty members were invited for collaboration. There were several Canvas ambassadors, meaning the faculty colleagues who provide the trainings around or facilitate those sessions for other faculty members across the university. So definitely there were some challenges. However, to move forward, university has done a wonderful job. And also regarding internationalization, international programs, university has done the partnership with Japanese universities, and they have a new initiative called CORNWELL Japan. This is more virtual, and also partner with many other online learning companies, SALOOJEE and other things. So faculty members are encouraged to participate. However, the priority is the life, the safety of the student and faculty members. That's all for now.
Thank you very much, KRISHNA. Thank you for this very brief but also comprehensive answer. I'm moving to now Dr. Grant Cornwell from Rollins College. Please, same question. How did COVID-19 disrupt or did not disrupt, I guess, the international collaborations in Rollins College?
Yes, well, it was profoundly disruptive to everything that we do, everything that we are. You know, we actually had about a week to empty the campus. And so we sent all of our students home, which meant not only around the country, but around the world. And it was the case that many of our international students couldn't get home. And so we provided housing for them, and they ended up staying for months, sort of in shelter, if you will, on campus when the rest of our campus was empty. But I think what was most disruptive, and of course with disruption comes the negative implication of destruction, but also the opportunity for innovation and problem solving. And so what was disruptive really was the delivery systems for teaching and learning. This is true everywhere, I know. But we moved our entire curriculum online in a week. And I think what we've learned in retrospect is that we didn't do a very good job of it. I don't think anybody did. And I think that the research on the learning outcomes of last spring would show that because, I mean, I think what faculty did because they had so little time is they simply took their existing syllabus and basically the existing structure of their pedagogy and moved it into a virtual environment. And I give them a tremendous amount of credit. They did it quickly and they did it with everything they had. But what our students have said in return, and this has been very disruptive, is they've said, we need to know whether our experience next year will be on campus and in person or virtual. Because if it is virtual, we think we're just going to sit this one out. The experience of learning was not as engaged. There wasn't all the ancillary learning that happens when humans are actually in conversation in the same space together. And they're sad. They miss the learning experience that they came to Rollins to enjoy and to participate in. And they're really not willing to settle for second. And this is, I think that this is especially true of our international students because they chose Rollins as a very particular sort of American style residential liberal arts college where all of the learning takes place in the context of human relationships. There are not large lectures. There are not PowerPoint, decks that you can download. It's all about the relationship between the faculty and the students. And we've had to change that. And I'll say one more thing and then I'll stop. So what about the coming semester? Well, in the coming semester, our faculties have been rethinking their virtual pedagogy. And I think that this is happening across the world at every university. And what I think we're going to see is this is going to be an accelerator for the effectiveness of online learning, because all of our faculties have realized, well, I can't just take my in-person course and put it online. I have to use many different modalities to have the same kind of engaged learning. So that's how it's been disruptive.
Thank you very much, Professor Cornwell. Indeed, thank you for also pointing to some challenges we need to think about how to address it. It's not an ideal situation and not everything can be delivered online. In particular, I guess students will be missing the experience of the campus, the library, the socialization. In fact, they can get the degrees, the courses and the teaching, but not the real campus experience. ANVER, SALOOJEE, please, the same question. How did COVID-19 affect your university in positive?
Thank you very much. I'm honored to be on this panel and with esteemed guests. So thank you for inviting me. Really what I think is important is everything that my colleagues have said thus far, but I'd like to just take a bit of a longer term view, and the global context is very important. For us, I think we're now beginning to look at the repercussions of the pandemic in education, and we believe it's going to be felt for decades to come. Canadian and international students will be participating and have already been participating, as Dr. Grant said, in probably the greatest post-secondary experiment in recent history. So why decades to come? Because I think this is a generational catastrophe, as the United Nations has said. 60% of all students globally are affected by closures, largest school disruption in modern times, 1.5 billion learners are out of school, 370 million are missing school meals and are affected by hunger. 70 million people are expected to be pushed back into extreme poverty. So all of this means that there's barely a country in the world where education has not been significantly disrupted. And that in turn means that the world's student population, particularly those from low and middle income countries, are going to be seriously affected. So our job is to think about how we in the global north can take education and globalize education rather than simply expecting students to come to us. So I think it has shifted the way in which we're thinking. Certainly, as my colleagues have said, at the university, we had to transform virtually overnight. Faculty members, as Dr. Grant said, simply took their courses and put them online and utilized Zoom or other mechanisms of reaching out to their students. Not particularly satisfactory, but in a short period, universities demonstrated around the world their immense capacity to pivot and to be flexible, contrary to what some people may think. And what really did happen was it enabled us to finish the semester, give people their credits and their degrees, and allow us to reflect on what we can do as a university over the summer. And over the summer, the university has, of course, made major strides in online platforms, providing faculty members with new opportunities to think about ways in which their classrooms will be adapted. And we have gone online. Most courses will be asynchronous, but online. Few courses will have the ability to have some small labs where appropriate on campus, but that connective tissue that enables first year, second year students to connect with each other will be greatly missed on campus. And the ability for international students to come to a downtown campus, be immersed in the city, be immersed in the life of the campus, that's what will be greatly missed. And the last thing I'll say very quickly is it is a changing world. And because of what's happened, international students can now, thanks to the government of Canada, take courses from abroad virtually, and it won't affect their visa status for the coming year. So we committed to globalizing our education and our curriculum.
Thank you very much, Professor Saloojee. In fact, you led me to my second set of questions, which is from the past to think about the present and the future. How can we do better? But also to, as you mentioned, there might be a shift from the traditional destination of mobility from south to north. And you also mentioned inequality. So in a previous panel, we also talked a little bit about the so-called global access to education, rather than looking at internationalization and mobility as an elitist type of exercise. So COVID-19 probably will give us this chance to make mobility available for everybody rather than for some part of our students. So that's a new vision. So if we reimagine mobility to be not simply travel from one country to another country, but to be more digital mobility or more in terms of global access, I guess that way we might find that destination may change. Students may not go to a country they originally will go to the top 10 Ivy League universities. They might prefer different modes of internationalization. And by the way, you also mentioned government, and that will be another kind of part of the question. And it's good that this panel include two persons from Canada and 2 persons from United States. So the idea of how decisions by governments to deal with COVID-19 generally, but more specifically to restrict travel, for example, or to change student visas policies may affect universities as well. And we need to also address that. So again, I will go in the same way through all 4 of you and ask you to reflect on those questions, starting with Ratna, GHOSH.
So the question is, what's going to happen in the future?
Yes, how the internationalization of higher education can be reimagined so that it's not simply dependency on travel, but rather representing a global access to all, not simply to few. So how do we reimagine internationalization of higher education?
Yeah, well, this is a big opportunity because when we think of student mobility, we were leaving out a whole lot of students who could not afford that mobility. So this is a good opportunity to have a hybrid system where we can do both face-to-face and virtual. And that would be, I think that is what is going to happen in the end, in the future, because face-to-face, there's nothing that's a luxury. We should not take it for granted, but there's nothing that can replace that, simply because of what the previous panelists said, that relationships and networks and the building up of social capital depends on relationships and things like that. So it's very important for people to have that, but also maybe we can make virtual courses and programs less expensive gradually, so that more people can have access to it. Now, there's a problem with this virtual thing because there are many people who don't have the bandwidth, or in many parts of the world where they would be able to have access. So it's important to remember that also. But we need to give the opportunity to everyone, to as many people as possible, so that we can have more equity, which we didn't have at all. And we need to be more conscious of the fact that costs should come down as we go.
Thank you very much, Ratna. Absolutely. Well, what probably is also interesting to observe here is that we certainly reduce the travel cost. We don't travel. We sit in front of a laptop and saving budget on travel, which, by the way, not only good for the budget, but also good for the planet. Less travel means less carbon emissions, and that's definitely something we need to keep in mind in the future. We should make more cost-efficient internationalization, or even if it is a domestication of the internationalization, it might work very well. But you're also right to point that we are missing the physical face-to-face interaction. So in a sense, ideally, if we can put some goggles and we can create a virtual classroom, three-dimensional, not simply a laptop screen, but a three-dimensional classroom. And I hope another panel tomorrow will discuss that, whether the future of digital technology will allow us to have a virtuality in the classroom. Then students, but faculty as well, will be much more in an advantageous position. Thank you very much, Ratna. So again, on the same challenge for the future, I would like to ask Krishna BISTA, and also to address not simply the classroom challenge, but also the research. If you can say how the faculty should prepare in their international collaborations to be able to undertake the necessary transformations as to do, again,
Sure.
international research, collaborations, and so on. Thank you. Krishna.
Yeah, it's a great question. In fact, the traditional notion of space and place are disrupted, and there are several factors: affordability, power, ranking of the universities, pull and push factors, war and politics, and now the COVID-19. All of these things definitely has been changing the landscape of higher education, international higher education. Future is really unpredictable, and what is predictable is the speed and direction of the mobility, the growth. I know, the many colleges, universities around the globe, those who can afford definitely look into the global south as another destinations. However, what I feel now, the speed is slow nowadays, right now for this semester, or maybe probably for the next semester, around the globe, to, the mobility of the scholars and the students selecting the universities. However, this also will create a hunger, a deep passion for these students to travel. Definitely the poverty or the politics always play the key role for them, and they like to go beyond their borders. So the mobility will go. And recently we can see that some of the universities are doing some sort of magical way. Probably you have seen the trains in Danish higher education. It is unbelievable. 90,000 plus students, where they made an application for Danish higher education during this pandemic, and probably they selected, I think it's 63,000 students. So the biggest schools, even in the US, such as the NYU, New York universities, where they have 19,000 international students, or you can take a case of University of Southern California with 16,000 plus international students. That speed will, be slow, but it's still in a couple of semesters, student or these recruiting agencies, the partnership, our branch campuses will be working aggressively. Because we have already known the power of the mobility, the benefit on campus, the mobility, diversity, and the richness in our classroom because of the trains of students coming and going. So this will continue. There is definitely a pause right now. The biggest priority is to the lives. We have, the living and breathing, eating, drinking. These are our priorities for now. However, students are, there getting ready to apply and go. The same thing applies to the faculty members. Although they have seen the potential now, staying home, working from, from these virtual connections, they have seen the possibility of connecting. So, right now there is a large number of students and faculty members who have seen the potential and waiting for the, the better time to go and to travels. And recently, in recent years, the pandemic has definitely taught a lesson for many colleges, whether it's in the US colleges or Canadian or UK or any other part of the globes. They have seen the possibility of also traveling to global South colleges and universities, and having this networking. So I see a bright future ahead, although there is a pause for a while, a year maybe or 2 years. However, the colleges have already known the possibility, the revenue as well as the other things. So this is a multi-billion-dollar industry. So Global South is another target, and colleges and universities, recruiting agencies, and the partnership will thrive probably in a year or two, but it takes time definitely. That's my general
Thank you.
Thank you.
What is interesting is that one example in Jindal we found is that because usually the best students will aim at the Ivy League, they will move to Cornell or Harvard or Yale or Oxford. But in time of COVID-19, certainly they couldn't travel there. And the applications we received was much higher than usual. So Jindal became an alternative to students who otherwise will aim to go abroad and study for a degree in the top universities, but we had a very, very high number of applications. And as you mentioned, it's interesting to look at the challenge short-term and long-term. So we have to prepare for the next 1 or 2 years, which will be quite unusual. But also probably in the same time, we need also to think long-term. So how we return to the new normal, or maybe we never return to the normal. Maybe we will travel much less in the future, exactly because we will get used to using technology and innovations, and we will create new types of collaborations that will not be as dependent on travel and mobility as they used to be in the past. So I'm moving to Grant Cornwell. So your vision for the future, how do you see internationalization of Rollins College, but generally also the universities moving ahead, particularly in the circumstances of United States, and I guess very dependent on international
thank you.
college. Yes.
Indeed, yeah. I just want to offer, in this comment, I want to offer a couple vectors of skepticism about global virtual learning. Time zones matter, and I think that I think pedagogically synchronous virtual learning is critically important because you're having real-time dialogue, and I think learning takes place in the context of that dialogue. And of course, synchronous learning will privilege some time zones and disadvantage others. And we found that it's been very hard for some of our international students who are in very different time zones to participate in our synchronous virtual learning at Rollins. And that's a very practical matter, but it can be a real source of inequality and inequitable access to the learning. Because if they have to get up at 2 in the morning to participate in a class, you know, they're disadvantaged in that way. And I'll just say one other thing about equity. This is a different take on, you know, there is actually something that is very egalitarian about students on a campus, because in some sense, they're all the same. And when you send them home to learn, they're all in very different circumstances. And Dr. GHOSH already mentioned different access to adequate bandwidth for virtual learning. But there are many other things. We find that it's our most economically disadvantaged students who most need to be on campus because their home situations are not conducive to learning. There's no quiet place to participate. They don't have the technology to participate. They don't have access to the bandwidth. And when you bring them all on campus, there is a kind of, like I said, equity there. There's a kind of egalitarianism there. So, you know, I just have a dampened enthusiasm about virtual learning and questions of equity, because not all students sitting at home have equal access. And the last thing I'll say is, not all students sitting at home are equally adept learners, right? Those students from privileged backgrounds will come to a virtual class and say, I've been doing this my whole career. I know how to do this. I already know how to study online. Those students from disadvantaged backgrounds who have not had that experience are, again, profoundly disadvantaged because there isn't any support system really for their learning in an online environment like there is when you're in class. Mm-hmm. So those are just some observations about equity and equality and egalitarianism in a virtual environment.
Absolutely. Thank you, Grant. Your points are very well taken. Indeed, we might find the hybrid model rather than simply online model much better. We might decide to have some sort of rotation of students. We may have, for example, the freshers coming in and experiencing the face-to-face classroom, whereas the last year students could be more flexible in terms of also they prefer maybe to be online and to take some other exercises outside the campus. So definitely flexibility is very crucial. Hybridity will be very crucial.
And if I could just say, yeah, and if I can just say that that's what our most recent model is, as we're trying to imagine the coming semester, is we've reduced on-campus occupancy to all singles, where every student who comes will have their own room, and so we have given priority to the first-year students, so they can come and be enculturated into university learning. And the upper class students are now more adept learners and can handle the online environment. So that's exactly what we've chosen to do.
Thank you, Gran. And the same question to ANVER SALOOJEE, how Ryerson University is going to face the challenge next 2 academic years. What are your plans? Are you going to take international students? What preparedness, digital, but also medical, you might need to envisage?
Yep,
Please.
no, really good question. So I want to begin with saying what many have said before, that is the learner is not homogeneous. And part of the challenge of online learning is it treats the learner as though they're all the same. So learners are not homogeneous because they come from different ethno-racial backgrounds. They're different by virtue of class, gender. So those factors are really important in understanding how we approach the learner. In addition, learners are differentiated by whether they are first-year students, second year, third year, fourth year, or graduate students, which means that we can't take a one-size-fits-all approach to the incoming group of students. And the last point I'd make with respect to the learner not being homogeneous is that the social experiment of the first-year group coming onto campus, meeting each other, developing their peer networks, study groups, peer interactions, that first year orientation, all of that is so critically important to first year students that it's difficult to replace via a virtual environment. We'll try to create it, of course. We're creating that virtual campus. So it's not just about the virtual classroom, it's about the virtual campus. And how do you actually make people who are in different parts of the city or different parts of the world feel like they're part of an incoming cohort, that they have a sense of identity as a first year group coming into and onto a campus. So they're coming into the campus, but they're not really coming onto the campus. And so that, I think, has a really different way of thinking about learning. So will the current global geopolitics plus the pandemic impact the way education is delivered? Certainly in the first year, it's going to. This year, it definitely will. We're already rethinking what the fall looks like. It's a virtual fall. The winter, that is winter of 21, that is January 21, we're still thinking through what that's going to look like. However, beyond that, I think, as I said in my opening remarks, this is a generational disruption, a global generational disruption. And I don't think as universities, we should forget that fact, because as the United Nations and other reports have shown, so many students are being affected globally, that those who have the capacity to be mobile and come to the global north are a very select few. They come from a particular socioeconomic strata. And for many of them, even it would be families who have, they can afford to collect money together to send one student abroad to study and hope that that works out. So, you know, we must, I think, be cognizant of that. There's this generational thing that's going to have an impact. Global access has been badly affected. Those who can't go into class today are our future learners. And as a result, sorry, we need to think about that, right? So
Okay.
yeah, we can take the short-term view, but I think we always have to keep the long-term view in mind. My last comment I'll make is I am equally skeptical of online learning. Certainly, asynchronicity has its merits. Hybridity has its merits. Synchronicity has its merits. But ultimately, I think, and I hope, because I'm a firm believer in the importance of the in-class experience with the peers seeing each other, reading each other, setting up their study groups in person is so important. I'm hoping that we will come back to the classroom, albeit in a different way with different teaching modalities. But I really firmly believe for first-year students, second-year students, nothing beats being in the classroom.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Absolutely. I think generally we feel that it is a generational challenge, and it has been already signaled by massive movements. The youth has challenged our generation. I'm considering myself into the older generation already. If we look at the climate change debate and Greta Thunberg action in Sweden, but also all over the world, the youth of today is not probably the same as when we were young. So the intergenerational dynamics will be very interestingly affecting, in addition to COVID-19, what the future of higher education and universities will be. But also, when you mentioned the geopolitics, I guess what is very curious that the best university used to be, and they are still there in the United States and United Kingdom, but the governments in the United States and the United Kingdom were, well, correct me if I'm wrong, but they are the worst in reacting to the COVID-19. They certainly couldn't get to the challenge of countries like South Korea, Taiwan, Iceland, Finland, New Zealand. So we see some peculiar thought. The biggest countries in the world, Russia, China, Brazil, United States, United Kingdom, underperforming in terms of COVID-19, but very small countries in Asia and Europe doing much, much better. And I'm wondering whether that may also affect the higher education, whether the future students will not aim at destinations where governments refuse students' visas and make quite incompetent decisions, but rather aim at universities based in small countries, but very flexible, very quickly adapting and reimagining the higher education. So those universities may create a very good online content as well and allow students without travel from Africa, for example. One doesn't need to go to Iceland or Finland or New Zealand. They might simply provide an excellent online modalities to study. So we might face in a longer future also some sort of different geography in terms of who are the best universities. We have about 15 minutes. There will be some questions from the audience, but before that, let me ask you also to reflect on that. How do you see long-term challenges? What kind of going beyond your own institution and thinking globally? What do you think about North and South? Will the same direction maintain for long, or would it be a redirection of students' mobility in the future? How can we envisage the dream of the best university in the future? How will that look like? Okay, let's go in the same order. RATNA, GHOSH first.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think that there are several things that we need to consider. One is, the first, of course, is how the country in which the university is located, how has that dealt with the pandemic? You know, I mean, people know that they should not go to certain countries. because those countries have just been incapable of dealing with the pandemic. That's one thing. The other thing is, of course, the geopolitical tensions. And we know that due to geopolitical tensions, such as, India and China, have resulted in a dramatic drop in the number of Indian students applying to Chinese universities. There's been a dramatic drop. Between Australia and China, there have been, and that is very bad for Australia because Australia is very dependent on students, foreign international students. So tensions between UK, US, Australia, Canada, and China have been bad, and there are 600,000 Chinese students worldwide. So that's a big loss. And so geopolitical tensions are very important. Then racism and discrimination that people have felt in many countries towards people from certain countries, that has also prevented international students from going to where they might have gone. And the other is the new nationalist policies of certain countries in terms of visa restrictions, in terms of closing down, universities which are not face-to-face, and just stopping international students' visas, or threatening to do so. So all this is very unpredictable. So many students are thinking that in the QS World Rankings, for example, there's the 2021 statistics reveal a significant rise in the rankings of Asian universities. And there's been a very big shift in the rankings of universities. So students have a lot of choice. They have a lot of choice where they can go to. And I think there will be more south-south traffic than there has been before.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ratna. I'm moving now to Krishna BISTA. But before that, Krishna, in addition to the question about the new geopolitics of higher education, we have a question to you from the audience, and it is, what will you recommend for universities with very large classes in dealing with social distancing? Please, Krishna.
Thank you. Back to the social distance, since we don't have any face-to-face classes right now, they will be following the guidelines provided CDC if the students are coming for any lab or any other essential work. However, they are also required to submit the test report if they are, the clear test report in order to come on campus. The other question is really important in context of geopolitics and things happening crazily in the US and other many countries. For many students who are planning to come US, probably they are making mind or decision based on the news or television news or the newspaper, any other medias. However, domestic, situation is slightly different. The upcoming politics and some of the, the changes in leadership or the way they have seen the message going out is probably different. The way America used to have its prestige and values in the global ranking has slightly different, in recent years. And as Professor GHOSH has mentioned, the visa policy, immigration rules and regulation are slightly changed. Even in last couple of weeks or even month, you can see how drastically wrong messages were sent to the international students. Sometimes they were said, hey, you are not able to take any online classes. The other times, yes, and there were several lawsuits, and then the different decisions made, regarding this international student enrollment. However, this is ongoing case scenario. It was way before, September 11, or even before that. However, we should not forget that we have 2.1 million immigrants, and there is a great contributions of international students and the faculty members. It is, the $44 billion industry. It's a big, giant international education industry. And right now we have 1.09, international students attending American colleges and university. As Professor Grant has said earlier, there are lots of challenges with these students right now, and the similar, issues and challenges even for our domestic students. So probably the leadership is the one, it's like your family. If you have great parents and, the vision, mission ahead, then there is no dysfunctional, then everyone has a, better plan and ahead. The same thing is happening here in the US, and also Professor Ghosh has mentioned that the direction right now, no matter whether you look into the India, China, South Korea, Japan, and the Middle East, these are our, the hot spots for the international students. And now with our international message, the relationship, all the geopolitical relationship will depend on how many students will come in our countries. And also in the US, and this is the case in Canadian University and elsewhere, that many of these current international students are the future faculty, dean, or provost. Even in US, there are more than 40 university college and presidents who have been leading the institution of higher education, and about 137,000, former international students who are the faculty members. And there is a big chunk in other fields, including STEM, science, engineering, technology, medicine, in those fields. Since the international education, international student scholars are the founding pillars, the backbone of the development and resources in the countries. The government has to look into more seriously, and the students should not be fooled with the politics or any other things. And no matter what happens, still these American college university will maintain their prestige, and they will be in the in the top ranking. So again, after the pandemics, students will be looking into these top ranking colleges in the US, Canada, Australia, other countries, and this will stay there because students are really motivated. They are eager. The young generation is different from our generations. They are looking for the better school, better opportunities, across the globe. And the politics everywhere has given the new dimension, new pressure. The young generation, they want to travel.
Thank you, Krishna. And Grant, same question to you. What are the longer term expectations? How the map will change? Are you worried if Donald Trump takes another 4 years term? Will that be good or bad for the universities in the United States?
Well, that's a very easy answer, only bad. But let me just say a couple more things about that. Obviously, in the US, this federal government has sent every signal possible that international students are not welcome here. This federal government has bungled visa policy, one cannot say enough about what impediments have been put in the way of international exchange by this federal government. But I think if you go beyond this federal government, and this will be my last comment about this, the question really is about the future of nationalisms and the current xenophobia. I'm actually optimistic. I actually believe that this is the last bastion of in the US of white supremacy. And these are, they're death for that kind of worldview. And I don't believe that we're in a historical moment of nationalisms that I think should be seen as reactionary and as resisting the inevitability of globalization that includes the globalization of higher education. I'm hoping it's a very short-lived period. I am sure that we will get through it, because if you look at the long arc of the whole trajectory of learning, of knowledge creation, it is obviously going to be global. So the question is, how do we hang on and survive this period of nationalisms and xenophobia that have been made all more complex because of COVID? So that's my thought there. Thank you.
Thank you, Grant. I'm moving to Professor Salooojee, again, with the same long-term vision about internationalization, but also let me throw, we have only 4 minutes left, and I want to simply voice few of the students' questions, since some of them are asking what would be the recommendation for those who would like to take a gap year. Again, we in Jindal actually offered 100 internship fellowships for our graduate students to kind of to employ them back after they graduate. So it's not really a gap year, it's an employment year. Other students are asking how can universities tackle the large-scale fall in mobility due to job redundancies created because of the shift to digital medium. So gap years, job redundancies. Any final thought from the panel? I'm starting with Professor Salooojee.
Sure. Thank you very much. All good questions, by the way, from the students. So, yeah, I think the confluence of global geopolitics and the pandemic has created national government responses that are not always the most favorable for international students in some countries. And that coupled with the domestic politics enables I think enables international students to think about where they really want to go. And so really thinking through the way in which national governments respond to geopolitics has in fact created situations where the two big source countries for many of the global north countries, India and China, has in fact been a significant challenge. Challenge why? Because of global geopolitics, the relationship between nation states, the inward-looking nature of domestic politics in some countries, the rise of nationalism and in particular right-wing forms of nationalism. But recall that this is a historic moment. We've had right-wing populism in the past, we've had fascism in the past, and we've come through it, and we've come through it well. So hopefully these are historical blips, and we will return to a different form of global politics. So the new models, I think, for universities will be out of this, a global campus, hopefully a more global university where universities connect more deeply with each other and offer programs separately. One of the more interesting innovations we're thinking about at our university is, in fact, opening up a campus with a partner university in the Middle East, North Africa region, so that we're taking education to where students are rather than expecting students to come to us. And we'll be offering, hopefully, beginning in the fall, our fall 2021, we'll be offering a whole range of programs in a significant MENA country. And that, I think, is part of our response to enhancing our global footprint and making education globally accessible. So for me, global accessibility is really important rather than simply looking narrowly at domestic politics. So two things with respect to gap. I've never been a proponent of the gap year, even though many would talk about it as wonderful experiences for students. I would say they should think about hybridity. If you're taking the gap year, at least keep a couple of fingers in online courses, and that will give you a sense of what's possible. Since it's asynchronous, you'll be able to do it on your own time, as well as gaining other valuable work experience. The second thing about redundancy, I think many universities are already beginning to think about what the future of education looks like. I know at our university, certainly through our continuing education division, we're already looking at different kinds of programming and responding to market forces and changes through our most flexible area, which is our continuing education, offering new kinds of micro-credentials, etc. And I think that's a way for universities to think about pivoting in to what might very well end up being a new kind of economy in the future.
Thank you. And we're exactly on time. Thank you all the panelists, and back to Vice Chancellor Rajkumar.
All right. Well, thank you so much for an absolutely fantastic session on international mobility, exchange, and education and research. We couldn't have had a better group of people who are not only part of this effort to promote internationalization, but also conscious of the challenges. I want to echo the optimism of Grant when he talked about the fact that some of the most fundamental values of liberal societies are indeed challenged. But I do believe that the human society is capable of bouncing back. And this is possibly a moment when the higher education institutions around the world are demonstrating that leadership. And this conference is also possibly an opportunity for us to be connected more closely and recognize how deeply connected we are in dealing with the kind of issues that we end up doing. I want to take this moment to thank Professor RATNA GHOSH, Professor KRISHNA BISTA, Professor ANVER SALOOJEE, and Professor Grant CORNWELL for their presence, their participation, and indeed their leadership in this initiative. I want to take a moment to thank my colleague VESSELIN POPOVSKI for moderating the session. We are on schedule, and thank you very much for that.